Hi, folks. Welcome to the fifth episode of Indie News Publishers Speak. I'm Jason Pramas with BINJ, and my co-hosts will now introduce themselves.
I don't know if I'm next to or below you. I'm Joanna Detz. I'm the publisher at ecoRI News in Rhode Island.
I'm Brian Zayatz, the managing editor of the Shoestring out in Western Massachusetts.
Okay, so in this episode, we found a fight. It's really like shooting fish in a barrel, isn't it, folks? You know, we go looking sometimes in this case like a couple hours before airtime. Just for what are the latest sort of strange and questionable things that are being done by people in the funding world, in journalism, that kind of thing, or in intermediary organizations. And inevitably, like every day, there's something, right? And so today we saw an announcement on LinkedIn by Maribel Perez Wadsworth, who's the head of Knight Foundation, right? Which, for those viewers that don't know, is a foundation that got all its money out of a newspaper dynasty, and has put, they say, 300 million back into sort of local journalism in the last decade or so, right? Decade plus. So they're a major funder of journalism, particularly nonprofit journalism. And so what is Maribel announcing? She's announcing that, and we feel like this is going to kind of continue our discussion on catalytic capital that we began in our last episode. This is this concept that's being pushed by Press Forward and other players in the nonprofit journalism space. Basically, the idea, forget about foundations and stuff giving grants to at least nonprofit news publications and sometimes for-profit ones. Now we have to figure out ways to get kind of patient capital to local news organizations. Okay, and that capital can be reusable. We can invest in one thing and then it makes some money, and then we get some money back from our investments, and then we can go invest in some other outlets. This all sounds lovely, except as we already discussed in the previous episode, most local news outlets are pretty small, and most of us, from what we're hearing, are not going to be able to avail ourselves of any such capital. And then today, Maribel Perez Wadsworth of Knight announces that Knight is putting $5 million, investing $5 million into a commercial news chain in Canada, in Northern Ontario. It's called Village Media. And, they own a couple, I forget the exact number. Let me just check. There's an article in the Globe and Mail in Canada that Maribel pointed to. Yeah, so Village Media, based in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, which is in Northern Ontario, owns and operates 27 news sites across Ontario, as well as a few politics and business publications in the province. It currently owns a single U.S. news outlet, the Sioux Leader, in Sault Ste. Marie in Michigan. Oh, isn't that nice? And licenses its technology platform to partners in Canada, the U.S., and New Zealand, which together publish about another 50 websites. Most recently, it signed a licensing deal with New Zealand publisher Stuff Limited for 18 new publications in that country. So the $5 million is going to allow Village to establish operations in 15 communities across 3 states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Illinois, right? 5 in each, it looks like, from the map that accompanies this article. And I don't know, folks, what do we have to say about this? There's more to say about what these communities that they've chosen apparently are, right? None of them are cities larger than 115,000. They're all, I think, mostly, they're outside of major cities. They're mostly in basically rural counties, I guess it would be fair to say. We didn't look at each one. We didn't have time. What do you think about this move?
Brian, I'll let you comment first.
Sure. I mean, I think we were kind of chatting before we got started here. Like, it feels like this is a move that fits a lot of patterns that we've been seeing, both long term and more recently. Like, I think, you're right to link it to this catalytic capital idea. 'Cause I think that's basically what this is. I think, like, one of the first things that I always kind of think about when a big announcement like this comes out is like looking at which states are going to be receiving that money. And, as usual, it's like purplish states that, and, the investment is going outside of major cities. So it's outside of like democratic hubs. And, oftentimes, like, we see like these kinds of investments are going to places where, foundations are thinking that there's like a flippable, state or community that could go blue that, sometimes does, sometimes doesn't. I don't know if that is, a night motivation, but, I mean, this is like, we're up in New England, we're in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And, for this reason, like, the three of us often miss out on a lot of these things, probably for many reasons, but one of them is just that I think, there's not a lot of
too charming. We're too charming.
Yeah, but there's not a lot of interest. I mean, there are certain places where we see there are hotspots for interest for initiatives like this that often seem to coincide with electoral maps in a very particular way. So. That was, I think, once I read down a little bit in the article and it's like, oh, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, no big surprises there. But, yeah, I mean, what else, what other sort of trends are we seeing here?
I sort of did a quick scan. We're all members of the Institute of Nonprofit News, which is an umbrella organization for nonprofit newsrooms, large and small. Just to see like how many newsrooms are already in operation in those states. And I found that there were 23 INN members already operating in Illinois. And that's, those are just nonprofits that happen to be members. I looked at Lion too, and there were, more listed. I didn't have time to see what the overlap was, but I'm always happy to see an investment in local news because God knows we need it. But I just sometimes question whether there was a scan of what outlets were already operating on the ground. We've heard tell sometimes American Journalism Project will come in with these big investments into a place where there's already an existing newsroom that's bootstrapping it, that has built community trust and connections and is doing the work. And so that's a question in my mind. Again, this information came in right before this program, and so I didn't have a chance to dig down into where these newsrooms are going to be and whether there is overlap with existing ones. But, it's always nice to invest in infrastructure that's already there as opposed to just like swooping in with this top-down approach. I mean, foundations are always telling us to listen to our communities, which we do anyway, gladly, because that's our job. But I just wonder how much listening there was and what kind of a scan of the landscape they did before this investment.
I mean, they're definitely looking at it as investors, and I think this definitely is in keeping with another trend, a related trend we've been talking about, which is this idea of consolidating, by hook or by crook, local publications, either with them or over them more likely, and burying the existing ones, right? What I'm seeing with Village Media and its CEO, Jeff Elgie, is obviously a very smart operation. Obviously, and I noticed in Village Media's own announcement of this development today in one of its own publications, people in comments were saying, "Oh, you take public money and now you're going to like go buy other publications and in the US, which you're always attacking, but, you're telling us not to buy American products, but now you're going to, take an American foundation's money and do business in the US. And that was interesting, right? It's just some rumblings. We don't know, right? And this is a chain that is considered, certainly by Canadian conservatives, like you could see right away if you look at articles, it's considered to be left-leaning, right, in some fashion, right? Whether the three of us who are on the political left would consider it left ourselves, probably liberal, which isn't the same thing, viewers. We've been over this before. But most fascinating was that the CEO, Jeff Elgie, in 2023 testified not for a famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, like if you're Google or Facebook, bill that became law, C-18 in 2023. I think it passed that year, and that year this Jeff Elgie testified against it. The law is meant to ensure, that Google and Facebook, among other social media giants, have to pay, news publications, right? Whose audiences we've said in past episodes, these social media giants have walked away with, a lot of the audiences we helped bring to social media, many of us news publishers. And there are a number of reasons why, these social media giants should be cutting news publications, especially on the ground, in on the profits they make off of viewers that are often on these platforms to read our content, especially in communities like the ones that Village Media serves, which, from what I've been reading already, these are communities, that were already effectively news deserts. And I think in at least some cases, Village Media is kind of coming in a market where there's a publication that's dying, and kind of being like vultures, but they are, well, let me get back to their efficiency in a second. So what Jeff Elgie testified was that, no, we get 50% of our traffic from Google and Facebook. And we do not want this law C-18 because it's going to potentially kill, our audience. And that audience is looking at the local advertising that is 70% of our income, and we need the audience to look at the ads because we're an ad-driven chain and we do not have paywalls, to their credit, for local people to look at their stuff. And having read that he took a position at variance with many of his colleagues in, I think the big Canadian newspaper trade association is called News Media Canada, and this CEO, Village Media, left that trade association over this, right? Having done this, having basically carried water for Facebook and in particular Google, I note that the chair of Village Media, chair of the board of this company, is the former vice president of news for Google. And, of course, we immediately, Joanna, Brian and I immediately are always like, how does a deal like this happen? I guess that's our immediate question. Like, why, of all the publications or chains that Knight could bestow its largesse upon, like a really sweet deal, right, where they're coming in with capital that Village Media didn't have, apparently whatever money it's supposedly getting from the Canadian government. And by the way, all I know about the kind of money that's out there in Canada that we don't have is something called the Local Journalism Initiative, which is a federal program up there that funds local news coverage to underserved communities. And the Canada Periodical Fund exists, and there are tax credits for journalists, and there's a journalism labor tax credit to support newsroom salaries. So I would be amazed if they weren't taking this. People are saying they are. So that wasn't enough, and now they're getting this money, and they're expanding, right? And they're expanding into the U.S., and we're like, why them? So, okay, they're very efficient. The people on Glassdoor Canada are complaining that they pay lousy, and the 8 salaries listed ran between, I think, 43 and 56,000 Canadian, which would be something like pay in the upper 30s to mid 40s, something like that in US dollars, right? So it's not much at all. We don't know the cost of living in those areas, whatever. But you know, we know that this is a centralized operation, that it provides a cookie cutter web platform that it controls, so it's proprietary, I think, and it has its own social media thing that people can use in these towns and cities where it sets up shop. It's doing a lot of events. It's doing everything that a lot of certainly American foundation funders and intermediary organizations like INN, I've been like everything that they're, the shotgun of things that they're telling all of us to do, which most of us can't afford to do. This crew is doing, you know, they're centralizing their editorial stuff. You know, they have an editor-in-chief for the entire chain, right? And we need to do more research. We need to look at each community. But, you know, all the sites look the same. And so, all right, it's efficient. But is it doing good journalism? Is it harming, you know, other like more independent publications on the ground? And again, why them? So go ahead, folks. What are we seeing? What's going on?
Well, I guess they didn't hear about the Trump tariffs, you know.
Well, they talk a lot about them. That's what people are saying. They're very much in the, you know, there's some kind of expression they have elbows up. I don't know what it means. I'm not Canadian, but there's some, you know, they've been very much, according to readers, and we need to look more into this if we're going to talk about it in the future, you know, like, yay, Canada, boo tariffs, boo Trump. I mean, okay, fine. You know, that's low. That's easy nationalism without getting, I suppose, super gross.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the thing that interests me is this. It seems like the profit arm of Village Media really is this, and we don't know if it's proprietary, so I don't know if I should use this word, but it's
Me either.
This media platform, the back end, the social media, you know, closed social media platform, the web services platform. And I mean, it would be great. I've been thinking about this for years as I continue to try to navigate the morass that is social media and try to, you know, gain eyeballs in a algorithm that I can't control and can't predict. I would just wonder, like, I mean, it seems like they could have invested maybe in making this social media platform free or even low cost to INN members, or, you know, like, these are the tools. I don't want my website to look like their websites and everyone else's website, but it's the tools, it's these, you know, the invention of a social media platform that links, you know, in a closed loop system to trusted sources of news where people can go and find information without being bombarded with Facebook ads and AI slop, hopefully. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like it would be nice if those things were made cheaper or free to nonprofit newsrooms that are doing the work. And so an investment of $5 million in a company that I don't know how much it makes off this, you know, the sale of it, licensing of its software, and but it seems like that's the reason it's so successful. Maybe it's not the news and the advertising, but it's this additional revenue stream. And again, like, we haven't had time to try to see what their finances are. And again, they're private company, right? So maybe that's not available. They're not a nonprofit, correct? They're a for-profit company. So
they're a for-profit company, and they, you know, in the testimony on C18, I think Jeff Elgie was saying that they pay Facebook for their content to be surfaced. So that's a whole other question, you know, like, like, what are the business relationships between this entity and Facebook and Google? We're already just right away starting to see some connections, right? This board member, board chair, you know.
I mean, presumably now, like all other news platforms, I mean, news operations in Canada, they've been deplatformed by Facebook because of that bill. that passed. So
Yes, that's right.
that's why they've invented this social network as a workaround, which I don't know. It seems useful, but again.
Well, it's something that, like, that's not a new idea, like, that's
Right.
been something that has been talked about for quite some time. I remember, I must have been 2021 or so, I was at, it was called like a shop talk gathering, for like small local publishers. And, this is one of the ideas that came out. It's like, let's build these, this is our wish list. Like, we want to see some of these shared back end things. So it is just strange to, see that does exist. But, whenever we look at like who's getting money for shared services, like, it always feels like it's, just not quite something that is actually going to be helpful. It's going to be coaching, or it's going to be, like, I don't know. It just like
Coaching.
Yeah, it
More
just
coaching.
it's just coaching.
That's what I always need. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just, like it just feels like we've been having the same conversations year after year, where it's like, okay, if you don't want to put money directly into journalism production, like, there are things that would be helpful, but and here it is, here's something that we might all be interested in, but and who knows, maybe they are going to try to scale it at some point. It's at least good that Knight is paying attention to it, but yeah, I'm just it's just frustrating. Like, it feels like we've lost years that something like this could have been in development for much wider access.
Yeah, and of course there are competing interests doing the same things, right? But in many ways, when I look at the leadership of Village Media, it looks like one of these consulting organizations, like Blue Engine, Blue Lena, and others. They're all, we've joked before, they're all blue, that have benefited, gotten a lot of money from some of these foundations as well, supposedly to help such as we, and then they turn around and charge us, right? I'm not saying this is identical, but look at their table of organization. Their senior leadership is, you got a chief executive officer, a chief strategy officer, a chief technology officer, chief marketing officer, director of community relations, director of finance and operations, director of content studio. Then we see editor-in-chief, executive editor, again, for the entire chain, right? Which tells us how centralized that their news production must be. And they're also, by the way, pushing their own flavor of AI stuff. So, doubtless that they're putting out content that isn't produced by humans too, which saves money, among other things. There's a lot of downsides as well. Then you got a senior HR manager, a director of client services. That's an interesting one. And then a controller, a finance person. So it seems like a lot more is going on with this company than just providing news. News seems to be an entering wedge for other services where money is being made, right, in different ways. I will also point out, apparently they rejoined News Media Canada since they listed here. They're also part of the Local News Collective, which is a Canadian publishers organization. The Canadian Journalism Foundation is another one, Online News Association, we know, National News Media Council, and then Press Forward. Hey, so they're, these are very connected people. So I think we can already see why them. They've got money behind them. Some of it's apparently public. We need to look more into that if we wish. Somebody's got money. I haven't had a chance to look at their other board members yet. A couple of them are CEOs of different companies. One's called Glacier Media. I want to see what these things are. But yeah, they're connected to Press Forward. They probably got Press Forward money, I suppose. We could look at that. A lot of commercial outlets did. some in tranches that were never announced. They just got money, right, in ways the rest of us didn't, certainly for much larger sums. But they're in the right rooms. They have a pretty big staff, which is probably mostly their senior staff that we saw there, with X number of lower level staffers and then a bunch of stringers and some AI filling in the rest of the news gap. So they're probably top heavy management wise, but that management can be deployed to any number of back rooms that we don't even know about, where deals get cut. They're also active in Canadian politics. We can see that. And, I guess we, respect, right? I mean, I think I certainly feel that contemporary news publishers need to be involved in politics if we're going to survive. But, so I mean, that kind of answers the question, at least in broad strokes. Like, they know people and they benefit from knowing those people in places where all the money is. Is it a sustainable model? That seems to be the buzz out there about them. What do you all think? Any initial thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, again, if they have this out of the box proprietary software, for lack of a better word, that's money. That's the fourth leg of the revenue stool that we don't have. We just don't have. We didn't have the capital investment to develop that kind of revenue stream, and so we're looking at advertisers, sponsors, donors, grants. That's it. We're always told to find sustainability within those round O events. So, in a sense, the way it's structured, I guess, so long as it can self-perpetuate customers for its product, and maybe find new ones through networks like INN. I'm sure that it won't be too long before we'll be introduced to another product like NewsPack that many of us can't afford, but is a really wonderful idea that is going to, help streamline news operations. Then, sure, sustainable. But that's just my opinion.
What if it's not sustainable? What if this infusion of capital is just what the company needed to be able to continue to fail upward? Expansion is often a desperation strategy.
AI is doing? It just keeps failing upward. I mean,
it is, although I think it's hitting a hard wall.
Canada, but yeah, I mean, sustainable in perpetuity, no, but successful enough that its CEOs will have golden parachutes. And I don't think it makes news more sustainable. We haven't seen that bear out.
What I'm getting at is if they're if they're kind of a tech company, right, it's expensive to run any of the things that they seem to be running, like social media stuff, right? Different kinds of, they have a service that tells like newcomers to cities and towns they're servicing, like where all the stuff is, the services are, this and that, right? Where they go for this, where they go for that. That's costs money to run on both the tech side and just in terms of content, keeping things fresh, and also moderation of anything like a social media service that they seem to have also is, I mean, yeah, sure, it can be done algorithmically, but still, it costs money to do this kind of stuff. It costs bandwidth. It's, the server costs, there's all kinds of other costs that mushroom upward. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to, I guess I should.
I don't know, but if they can still keep raising capital for these shiny objects, then, they could go for quite some time.
Yeah.
Is Knight Foundation going to call its investment? Doesn't sound like it.
Right. Well, that's the patient capital model, right? The
patient capital that we don't.
That we cannot avail ourselves of.
Our grants are very impatient. They want reports at the end of them.
Well, and there just aren't enough of them, and there aren't even as many as there were a couple of years ago.
I know. So.
Well, I'm curious too. I mean, is there going to be anything that prevents this group from just selling off their portion too? Like that's after it's reached financial stability or whatever the term is that Knight uses, and Knight sells off their half, then, I mean, they could, unless there's some stipulation, seemingly they could, do the same thing they've done before, where they merge, they sell off, and then, I mean, they would probably be able to turn $5 million into more than that by doing that,
Well, riddle me this, folks. What's better if you want to sell your company, a 27 outlet company with various kinds of subsidiaries around the world, or a 42 outlet company, which they now will have by getting 15 new outlets in the U.S. Ooh, cha-ching, right? And I mean, what happens after that sale? How does Knight relate to the new, owner?
Yeah.
Is part of the sale going to be Knight getting paid off? Perhaps, know.
And again, we're talking about publications that are in locations that people in the funding world are interested in. So, whether or not it's sustainable as a business, there might just be another cash cow. Because let's see, it's 2026. Probably not by the 2028 election cycle, but, this could be a calculation, these are things, or midterms, midterms are a big, people care about those. So
I'm glad you're saying this, because when I've been talking about this stuff with foundations in the Democratic Party, and I was watching it later, I'm like, oh man, people are going to call me paranoid. But so now you're doing it. So,
Well, I get it from you, Jason, but I mean, it's
all my
true.
fault, really.
Jason, you're contagious.
But it's true. I mean, I don't, we don't see this kind of money coming into Massachusetts,
Right. I mean, I would say that we do. I've certainly heard, what's that publication in, it's funny, they're in Western Virginia, but they're not in West Virginia. I remember this. It's a publication called the Cardinal News. And I talked to the publisher. Yeah, I talked to the publisher when we were forming ANO. He had heard about ANO, the Alliance of Nonprofit News Outlets folks, and was interested. And then when I talked to him, he's like, nah, we don't really need that. We do well. I used to be the editor of the one paper in this county, and then it went under. I didn't own it, but then I knew all these local rich people and business people, and we put together this new digital thing, and we're doing gangbusters. Right. So there are markets like that, and these could be markets like that, right, where there's enough business and, of course, government sector stuff and nonprofit sector stuff to sustain advertising for maybe one publication with a very professional, and clearly Village Media is very professional, right, in ways that a typical startup by people like us, at least at the beginning, is not, right? So, and they can just do things very deftly. And what do you think those first hires are going to be in those 15 communities? Sales. They have to be sales positions, right? So I mean, you can figure they've done the analysis. Knight's been in on it, and they can see that they can make some money in these markets, right? So it's a bit different than, as Brian infers at least, rural Massachusetts isn't necessarily quite like that. Maybe Pittsfield is, Northampton certainly is, but already sustains, more than one publication, right? One of which is very commercial. And Springfield, of course, is certainly a, pretty large market for a regional sort of population center in straddling central and western Mass. So, I mean, but it's just a little different. And yeah, it is very much a blue state, right? So if the rationale for investment by Knight is partially political, as we kind of think it is, right? On those grounds, they wouldn't want to do it. And there's probably enough competition in our small cities outside of Boston that they wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if these folks are smart, they probably looked, just to talk about Western Mass, they probably looked at this market and they say, the Greenfield Recorder or the Daily Hampshire Gazette could close at any point,
True.
Newspapers of New England could, decide they've had enough, it's not worth it, and just pack up, seemingly that writing has been on the walls for some
20 years.
time. Yeah. So, I don't know if this conversation is happening in these rooms, but once, one of those papers goes under, like, if it were me, if I was the smart business person with lots of money, and connections, I would say, like, here's my plan for when that happens. Like, this place clearly can support a publication, and, here's my, gonna have ad sales, gonna have, it's all would basically be there for the taking. And I don't think they're gonna say, oh, let's just give the Shoestring money and they can step up and fill the gap,
And I don't think that the 5 million that they're putting out is all the money. I think Village Media, obviously, it's got to have other money. You divide, 15 new outlets into 5 million, and it's not that much money, right? And I think part of it's that, they already have all the software. They got the central staff and everything. They will be operating binationally, but so what? I mean, everybody knows Canada, it's an independent country, but not economically and telecommunications wise, and in every other way, we might as well just be adjacent. They might as well just be adjacent states, or we might as well be adjacent provinces, to them. So that's not going to be very difficult.
Annexing Canada as the 51st state, Jason?
I'm suggesting, though I've long been joking when I play video games with my Canadian friends about them being in the 51st state, etc. Before the whole Trump thing made it almost like serious. No, I'm pretty sure I'm not alone in this as a left-wing analyst, and our Canadian left-wing analytic colleagues would agree. I see them saying similar things. They're effectively an economic colony of the U.S. They just don't have an economy without the U.S. It's just heavily interlocked, and politics follows suit. Whatever the sort of, podium thumping protestations of various nationalist politicians in Canada, in any party, it's just true. So I see from private chat that, it's time to wrap up. So any closing thoughts, folks, on this?
I'm just interested to see where this, how this plays out, whether it starts with 15 and it ends there, or whether we start to see mission creep into other states that aren't these purpley battleground rural areas. And, there are models like the State's Newsroom, which, is itself a nonprofit. And I think, at least in Rhode Island, the State's Newsroom outlet here is doing a bang-up job, and they are filling a gap. And so, I don't know. My mind isn't made up about whether this is good or bad, but it does seem questionable. And I do have a lot of questions.
Yeah. Well, I don't think this is the last of these kinds of deals that we're going to see. I think, for publications that have savvy business people attached to them, as Village Media clearly does, like, I am going to jump at this catalytic. It's hard to say, catalytic capital. It's money, it's there, and they know that they're the kind of people that are likely to get it. And so I think we'll see more of this. I don't think it's all bad, but be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it's one thing we can say with certitude is that it's $5 million that's not going to be granted to news outlets such as ours. And we could also say that we could easily gather 15 news outlets that we're friendly with in New England and get $5 million. That would be nice. That would help as investment or just as grants. Knight Foundation, So I just leave. I'll put that out there as my closing thought. So we'll be back in a couple weeks with some other exciting and probably depressing topic that affects independent news publishers like us. So a couple Tuesdays from now, expect us, as Anonymous used to say when it was cool.
Dun,
so
dun, dun.
dun, dun, dun. Okay.
All right.
Bye, folks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
And we will